So bab 4 talks about what happened after Japan surrendered. Selepas Japan menyerah kalah, apakah yang berlaku kepada Tanah Melayu, Sabah dan Sarawak. So firstly, all three have one thing in common, which is that when British came back, they did BMA, British Military Administration. So after Japan was gone, British came back and then they did BMA. So BMA is a way to try and recover Tanah Melayu, Sabah and Sarawak after Japan surrendered, because during Japan rule, Japan didn't really do a good job in managing the economy of all three territories. So basically they were all dead. Like they were all in trouble lah. So BMA is a way to try and stabilize things, to try and recover things. So the first thing is BMA told all of these like radical politicians, these ahli politik yang radical, to give back their weapons, mengembalikan senjata, and they want to do that because they want peace to come back to they want things to come back to normal. They want peace to return, and those weapons were for Japan kan. Now it's British ma, so they want to retrieve all of that so nothing bad happens. However, BMA failed to do that. So yeah, that was the first intention. Their first goal was to bring back peace and stability. But number two is that they want to have the people gain trust in them, because what happened with Japan rule was the people lost trust in Japan, because Japan did really bad in managing the economy. There were inflations, there were a lot of diseases, and people were dying, and yeah, but they couldn't even buy food lah. Basically, it was a really bad time back then. So BMA was supposed to try and help with that as well. However, because it was so bad, the problems were so bad, BMA couldn't help with that either. So they wanted BMA was supposed to be like a shining light, like hope for these people to get back to normal, but they failed in that. So the main issues that they want you to mention is this part. BMA menghadapi kesukaran untuk membawa pasok jentera ala ganti mesin dan teknologi yang menyebabkan sosioekonomi sukar dipulihkan. So BMA is supposed to recover the economy, but because they couldn't do so many things like bringing in all of these advanced machinery to try and develop the territories, they failed, and people didn't like it. The people were disappointed. So because of that, they had to change their plans. So after Japan surrendered, British took over and had BMA. But after BMA was cancelled because of how bad it was, what they did instead was they made Malayan Union. So next is Malayan Union, and Malayan Union is basically the biggest mistake of British lah. So how did Malayan Union come in the first place? Basically, they want back then they didn't really have much control over Tanah Melayu, Sabah and Sarawak. They were mostly just protected territories. They didn't have that much control over those territories because some of the states like Terengganu, they had really good laws, and that helped the Sultan to maintain their power instead of British. British was still there, but they weren't actively taking over the NNMTB. They only took over NNS and NNMB. So this Malayan Union is a way for them to take over NNMTB, Sabah and Sarawak as well. So the datar belakang, I'm not going to go through this that much. I mean, I'm not going to go through this passage, this part. Basically, Major General Rathhone was told to make a new system in Tanah Melayu, which is Malayan Union. And then George Henry Hall talked about this in Parliament, and then they made the plan using and the plan was called Kertas Putih 6274. And basically in that Kertas Putih, it generally says that British will take over Tanah Melayu and everything will be under British, and they will have union, kesatuan. So it is all under British. So what happened? Firstly, Unit Perancangan Tanah Melayu, which is the Tanah Melayu Planning Unit. Basically, this unit is to plan what will happen to Tanah Melayu after BMA, and then after that they discussed it, and then after that PPM, Persatuan Pelajar Melayu Britain, they were like, they sent a memorandum, and the memorandum said, don't make it jus soli. So what is jus soli? Jus soli is kewarganegaraan, syarat kewarganegaraan berdasarkan tempat lahir. This is very important. I think this will come out in exam. So what jus soli basically means is, if you are born in Tanah Melayu, you are immediately orang Tanah Melayu. If you are born in another state but you come to Tanah Melayu, you are not a warga negara. So this is a bit problematic back then, because you know how Tanah Melayu, orang Melayu have these special rights, right? They want to maintain their special rights. If people from like other countries like Portugal, Spain, China, they come to Tanah Melayu and then they're born here, and then they have this jus soli, this means that they will immediately become part of Tanah Melayu. They will immediately be on the same level as orang Melayu, which rubs them in the wrong way, because remember that orang Melayu were here for a very long time. So they have these like this bad feeling that the colonizers, as they call it, would take over the country. Not me, times have changed now, but back then they had that mindset. So after that, Tan Cheng Long and Persatuan Cina sent a memorandum as well to discuss more about Tanah Melayu, and then they had this Kertas Putih, which I mentioned earlier, and then they basically agreed with Malayan Union. So how does the pentadbiran, what is the system like? Firstly, it is a union. Right now we have a persekutuan, which is, I think, coalition. Basically, persekutuan means there are many states, and then they all combine together to become one big country. But with kesatuan, this is my brother's recommendations. But for kesatuan, what it is basically, instead of having multiple states under one rule, multiple states with your own rules combine together to become one big country under a general country rule. Instead, these states do not have any rulers, technically speaking, and they are all considered to be one whole entity. So that's number one. NNMB, NNMTB, and NNS, except for Singapore. Singapore was under their own stuff because they had more plans for that. Basically, all of these states are under one entity. In Persekutu means multiple entities become one country, but this one is only one entity. Next is Sultan menjadi Ahli Majlis Raja-Raja. I think it is wrong. It should be Ahli Majlis Sultan. And based on what they mentioned in the later chapters lah. And basically, back then, Raja had rule over the country, but because of Malayan Union, they only have rule over Islam and Adat Melayu. And then Ketua Pentadbir, the leader was the governor, and any majlis, right? Any like majlis executive, majlis perundangan, any of these like bodies, these government entities, they were all under the Suruhanjaya Tinggi, which is the I forgot what it's called in English. Basically, the head of observing that British territory. But yeah, governor and Suruhanjaya Tinggi are different. Suruhanjaya Tinggi is more like someone who watches over stuff. Governor is one who governs the country, one who mentadbir negara tersebut. Next is kewarganegaraan, and it is where the controversy starts because of jus soli. So they decided to ignore the message and go with jus soli anyway. So again, anyone who is born in Tanah Melayu in Singapore, they are immediately part of Malayan Union. They are immediately Malayan lah. And then there were a few extras, like for example, one who is more than 18 years or above but has already lived here for a while. They are still warga negara. And then people who are younger than 18 but their parents are Malayan are also Malayan, even though they are from another country. But what this means is, if there was a couple from Britain who came to Tanah Melayu and gave birth to a child there, that child is immediately Malayan. while Malay has the same rights as Malays. So that will rub some Malays the wrong way. Of course, there are some restrictions. There are some like extra handicaps, like if you are not born in Malaya but your parents are part of Malaya, then you are Malayan. Or if you aren't born here but you moved here at an early age and you lived there long enough, you're also immediately Malayan. But the main problem here is Jusoli, which is if you are born here, you are immediately orang Tanah Melayu. So how did British get the sultans to agree with Malayan Union? Long story short, they didn't. But the whole story is British sent H.C. Whelan, to try and convince them to sign the agreement. And then Whelan said, oh, they are going to agree with the agreement. But when British sent Sir Harold McMichael to hand them the agreement to sign, he noticed that some of the Raja didn't actually agree. They, unlike what Whelan said, which is everyone will agree to sign the agreement, some of them actually didn't. So McMichael had to put a few tricks to get them to sign. So firstly, he came to Tanah Melayu using the royalist ship, and then next he went on a rampage, going through every single state in Tanah Melayu to get them to sign. So firstly, he went to Johor. Johor was okay with it, and then they went to Selangor, and Selangor was also okay with it. But this is where it gets tricky. So when he went to Pahang, he didn't really like the agreement, but he was forced. And then after that, he went to N9 on Negeri Sembilan, and then the Sultan there was also forced. And then he went to Perak. He was also forced. Even though he tried to delay the signing, he couldn't delay it long enough, or else he would get some special treatment. So he also agreed. And then he went to Kedah, and basically they had an argument. They were like, I shouldn't be signing this, but again, forced. And then Perlis forced, and then Kelantan forced. He basically, again, he didn't if he didn't sign, he will get special treatment. And then lastly, he went to Terengganu, forced. And Terengganu getting forced to sign is a very bad thing, because as we learn in the junior forms, Terengganu's laws, Undang-Undang Tubuh Kerajaan Terengganu, were actually pretty good. The law state that the Sultan has to be the head of the country. But McMichael making him agree this is against the law. But he was forced. So again, yeah, they were all forced. Menggunakan desakan. So what was the reaction? Firstly, the Raja-Raja, of course, they didn't like this. They were forced to agree with it. So why? Because number one, they lost their powers. Number two, remember that last time some of the states were naungan, protected. Now they are colonies, which is worse than being protected only. Protected means British will help you with some stuff. Colony means you are completely taken over by the British, which is worse. And then thirdly, no, there was no thirdly lah. This is just saying that they express their disagreement with a few methods. Number one is they tried to complain this to the England Supreme Court, Mahkamah Tinggi England, but and then they said that McMichael illegally made them agree to it because they were forced, remember, but it didn't work. And then they sent Surat Bantahan, a letter to disagree with Malayan Union. They claimed that they were fooled by McMichael. They were betrayed. They were manipulated. Basically, they didn't want to sign it, but McMichael forced them to. And then others noticed that they signed it, but they didn't realize how bad it was. They didn't realize that it will completely take away their powers. But and then Syed Putra Damul Lail is, I think, N9's Sultan. No. Was it Johor's one? I forgot already. Let me just look here. Sheikh Jamalul Lail is Perlis. The king of Perlis, he said that he couldn't think about it. He wanted to think about deciding whether or not he should sign, but they forced him to sign it immediately. So next, after they complained by themselves, they supported the Congress. I won't talk about this because Congress is mentioned again later. Number 4 is the Queen of Perak. Also took part in going against the Malayan Union. Like, she basically led the protests, and then they completely ignored the election of, I think it was Sir Edward Gen. So Sir Edward Gen is the governor, and normally if you're the governor, of course you need some special guests to watch you get coronated, right? Get chosen. I mean, get officially become the governor. But all of the kings, all the sultan, the raja, they all boycott. So there was no one there. They all ignored the upacara pelantikan. And then next, after the kings were forced to agree, not forced to agree. After McMichael came, BMA officially mentioned, BMA officially brought up the fact that they will become Malayan Union. So of course people don't like this, but because again it causes the people in Tanah Melayu to completely lose their rights. So they had a few ways of expressing that. Number 1 is using newspapers, Utusan Melayu, Majlis, and Watan Negara. So these are all very harsh towards British, and then they basically said we should fight the British. Next is Badahan Shandakyawan. So the high profile people in Tanah Melayu were also disagreeing with Malayan Union, because again it causes the Sultan to lose their power and people to lose their rights. So they had a few ways to go against British. So one of them is Congress, which again we'll go to later. But basically, all of these like very very well-known politicians, very very well-known leaders, they all disagreed. And then also they mentioned about women's rights. So Cikgu Zahara Abdullah, Halim Abdul Majid, those are two very common people, two most famous people in this in women in this chapter, and basically they were all fighting alongside the male leaders to go against Malayan Union, because again Malayan Union doesn't only affect the rights of the Sultan, it also affects the country as a whole. And then Bersatuan, a lot of these like groups, this Persatuan, they were inactive after Japan, because after British. But after they learned that Malayan Union will happen, they were kind of mad. So they were reactivated, or some new ones were made to go against McMichael and Malayan Union. Also, what happened was some of the people who used to be in British back then, like the leader of NNS and NNMB and NNTB, like Francis Tottenham, if you remember him, they were also thinking that this isn't a good idea, because because back then they have this they were supposed to decolonize some countries, but this one is taking more control over them. And then these are the examples of how the people protested in Kelantan, Kedah, and Johor. When McMichael tried to force the king of Kelantan to sign, a lot of people, 10,000 people, were there to tell him to F off. And then there are also people in Kedah and Johor. And then this is the main part, which is they had a congress. So basically Zakba, Dato' On Jafar, and Nuku Abdul Rahman, they all decided to make this congress to try and collect every leader to come together and discuss about how to handle this situation, how to fight Malayan Union. So Basically they decided to make a congress and then make everyone come in and talk about this situation, and then they agreed to create UMNO. And then the second congress, the second meeting, was basically when UMNO was officially created, and UMNO basically said that all of the Malays should fight back, and we should all realize that this is a very bad situation. Malayan Union will completely take away our rights. So when Malayan Union actually happened, it was called Hari Kematian, and basically they all wore these white cloths to mourn, because basically when Malayan Union became a thing, it was the day that they lost their integrity, their kedaulatan, their sovereignty. And then UMNO also they organized a few protests in multiple states. Why? Because LD Gamens and Rhys Williams came to Tanah Melayu because they wanted to survey on how bad the situation is in Tanah Melayu. Do they really disagree with this? Do they really think that it's a bad idea to have Malayan Union? So they came in and they basically protested everywhere Gamens and Rhys Williams came, to prove to them that they are mad at Malayan Union and that they should change their mind on stuff. So it worked. Gamens and Rhys Williams wrote that yes, it's a bad idea. The Sultan didn't want to do it, or if they did do it, if they did sign it, they didn't know how bad it will be, and this helped in abolishing Malayan Union and leading to Persekutuan Tanah Melayu. Okay, next is Sarawak. So basically after Sarawak was released from Japan rule, after Japan surrendered, Australia first came to Kuching because Australia and British are allies, and they had BBCAU, so British Border Civil Affairs Unit, which is basically Australian BMA. And then after British came, they had BMA instead. But after a while, Weiner Brooke said to British, "Oh, you can have this. You can have Sarawak because I don't want it anymore." So to understand this, when Charles Brooke came into Sarawak first, not Charles Brooke, James Brooke came to Sarawak, he was not in the same government. He was not part of the British government. So he owned it himself, but he wasn't actually owning it with British. It wasn't an official territory of British. It was just his own territory. So Weiner Brooke said that I don't want it anymore. You can have it, British. And this caused a few controversies. So why did Weiner Brooke want to give away his territory to British? Number one, he didn't have a son to give the king title to, and he did not want to give his nephew the power. Why? Because if you look at here, actually no. Wait. If you look at here, it mentioned that the nephew and his father, they were part of the temporary kerajaan sementara, the temporary what's it called again, government. Because basically when Japan took over Sarawak, they had some people to take care of Sarawak as well, because Japan can't do everything, right? And when British came and asked them to give away Sarawak, they said no. So you might be thinking, well, if they said no, if they said no, why would Weiner Brooke give to people who say no? Like, Weiner Brooke wants to give away Sarawak to British, but Bertram and Anthony didn't want to. They wanted to keep to keep Sarawak. So of course he wouldn't want to give it to them. Next is British basically low-key forced them to give away the Sarawak to British. And then lastly, they had Weiner Brooke had not enough money anyway. So how was the process? Firstly, they told Weiner Brooke to sign an agreement with George Henry Hall, and then he sent General Gerald T. McBrien to try and get the leaders of Sarawak to sign. Again, he didn't just make them sign, he forced them to sign. So he came back with all of the agreements, and then the worst thing is that people of Sarawak didn't even know this was happening. So after that, British asked Weiner to get the people of Sarawak to agree first. So remember, the people of Sarawak didn't know. So didn't know. So British told them to make them know and ask if they're okay with it. So so what did they get? Number one, well, most people were against Sarawak, but Chinese were supporting Sarawak, and some people didn't even know what this meant. So that proves three things. Number one, people are against giving away Sarawak because of mentions that I'll mention later. Number two, Chinese support Sarawak because of mentions that I'll mention later. And number three, some people didn't even know what Sarawak was under. Like, they didn't even know what this was for. And that's because people weren't educated on this enough. So after that, Gammon and Rhys Williams brought that report to Madis Negeri. And I'm not so sure what Madis Negeri is made out of, but surprisingly, when they have this this voting on whether to give away Sarawak or not, 19 people agreed, 16 people were against it. So of course, because more people were agreeing with giving away Sarawak, they gave away Sarawak. And yeah, remember that Sarawak was also a protected state, but because of this, they gave away to British. Sarawak became a colony. Oops. So what were their reactions? Firstly, people weren't so happy with it. I mean, most people weren't happy with it because number one, there was a law that mentioned that they should that eventually the people of Sarawak will be able to take over the country after a while. But because Weiner Brooke gave it away to British, this is against the law, because instead of giving the power to Sarawak, they gave the power to British instead, which is the complete opposite. So they disagreed with this because they wanted to gain independence. Number two is Charles Brooke mentioned that he wants to continue the Brooke family rule, but Weiner Brooke gave it away. And number three, General Tim McBrien used some very interesting tactics to force people to sign. So how did they go oppose this rule? How did they oppose this decision? Number one is some leaders have meetings, and some leaders will have meetings. The most important meeting was organized by Johari Anang, and there were a few groups that joined, like PPM, BPS, and PKMS. And basically what they decided is they would have a demonstration, a protest on the 1st of July every year, I think, until Sarawak becomes part of British. Until Sarawak becomes independent, sorry. And then next is they wanted demonstrations. I mean, they after they agreed to have protests, they did the protests. And they said some things like, look, a long story short, they said, oh, we just want to become independent, no cession bill, Charles Brooke, Weiner Brooke should be giving the power to us, not you guys, and so on. And then number three, because British noticed that most of the people who were against Sarawak were people who were working in were working as teachers or government officers. He said that British brought it up that if you try to protest against us, we will not allow that. We will fire you. You are not allowed to protest. So what did they do? They resigned, and they were like, "F you." They were like, "If you don't want us to protest, when we're working for you, then we're not gonna work for you anymore. So we can protest." Next, again, women's rights, mainly Cikgu Lily Ebowin, and Hajijah Sipa Tuanku Osman. So, and all of these people, they also sacrifice their time and effort to fight for independence. And then next was they used newspapers. So they created Utusan Sarawak, which is basically anti-propaganda. They basically said F British, F British, F British. And next is they sent a letter to disagree, just like with Malayan Union. But they couldn't do anything about it. Anthony Brooke, who remember, Anthony Brooke wants to keep Sarawak, but he tried to use the political ways to get it back, but he couldn't. And lastly, they created Rukun 13, which is basically a more political group, a more radical group of people who are against British. And then they had a meeting to kill Duncan Stewart, which is the Pegawai Tinggi, the general officer, I think. So they made a plan to assassinate Duncan Stewart. Assassinate means like kill secretly, kill like without them knowing. And then this is called Songkit Berdarah. And because they killed Duncan Stewart, British got really angry, and basically they completely turned into a dictatorship, if you can say that. So they asked all of these like Persatu 1 to close down, and then and they told Anthony Brooke to give up, and Anthony Brooke told them Anthony Brooke told everyone else to give up. And then the people who were behind the killing, Rosli Dobi, Moshdi Sidek, and Awang Ramli and Bujang Suntong, these three are the leaders, right? The three people are the leaders, while Rosli Dobi was the killer. And then all of them were hung to death, and everyone else who was part of Rukun 13 was in jail. So this showed that the efforts for Sarawak to gain independence failed. However, it was a good sign of what's to come in the future. But how about the people that supported Sarawak being given to British? They supported it because number one, remember that after Japan, the country was really bad and Weiner had no money. So this is like a sign of hope to recover the economy. So that's I think here, memajukan negeri. And then next is this is here, golongan penyerahan menyuburkan YMA untuk menggalakkan kemajuan orang Melayu dalam bidang ekonomi dan sosial. Basically, with this British taking over, they thought of it as a way for people for Sarawakians to get more involved in politics, not politics lah, but basically if they, long story short, these two are similar. They hope that British would help to develop Sarawak more and have the money for it, and when they develop the country more, then the people in Sarawak will be smarter and they will be able to they'll be able to help people who aren't as lucky with education at first, because back then Sarawak wasn't that rich. So a lot of people didn't have education. So they're hoping that British taking over Sarawak would help with giving more people an opportunity to learn. And then lastly, British and Sarawakians were given more roles, were given more opportunities to work for the government, for the British government. So again, they will give them more experience. Number one, they'll give them more experience in working, and number two, Sarawakians will still have power over their own state, because most of them are still working as part of the government, even though British is the most powerful power. How about Sabah? So first of all, when Jepun surrendered, BMA came in, and SBUB, which was the company who took over Sabah back then, because they were known as North Borneo kan. They decided to give North Borneo or Sabah away to British as well. So why? Because number one, British wants it. Why does British want it? Because back then they were giving independence to India, Myanmar, and Sri Lanka. So they wanted to have something else to take over. So they wanted to take over Sabah instead. Because remember, Sabah back then was only a protected state, but they wanted to take over it as a colony. Next, British menguasai perhubungan luar negeri dan pertahanan Sabah. Next, because SBUB was already working with British, they were already like comfortable with giving away British to the. They were already comfortable enough with giving away Sabah to the British, so they were okay with it lah. Basically, number 3, they had no money. So what was the reactions? There were 2 reactions. Number 1, they didn't like it. Number 2, they didn't even know what's going on. So the main problem with Sabah is way too diverse, and that's a bad thing in this case, because it's hard to make everyone come together and fight against British. But they did do that with Pas, Barib, and PKML. However, when okay, back at first they were peaceful. They were like, okay, we're just going to try and recover the economy, and we're going to try and teach more people about educate more people about politics, educate more of the Bumi Putra about politics. But slowly, they were a bit more active. They were a bit more upfront, like we should get independence and so on. They basically mentioned things that British don't want to hear, and because British don't want to hear that, they tried to stop this movement. They tried to stop the people from realizing that they should fight back against British. So how did they do that? Number 1 is they gave promotions to people so that they will not fight against British. And number 2 is they caused the people in they caused some of these leaders to go to spread out. And why do they want to spread out? Because why do they want to increase the ranks? Why do they want to promote people to work for British? Because they don't want them to fight back against British. Why do they want to make everyone spread out? It's because they work better as a team together. When they are all together, they are able to do more things together lah, basically. But because British didn't realize this, they told everyone to go to their own, to separate, to go to their own places. And that's because they don't want them to work together to try and convince the people of Sabah to fight back. Because if it's only like one person taking over KK, for example, that one person isn't going to be able to convince people to take over, to listen to him. They need a whole team, and British know that. So yeah. Next, they mengehatkan peluang dengan dalam pentadbiran. Remember that they don't want people, Sabahans, to realize that they should be fighting British. So they never gave people, the Britons, the Sabahans, any chance of working for the government, except for the people who got promoted. Because they already knew, but most people don't know, and they don't want them to know, because if they know, then they will fight back, right? So most of them were clueless. They didn't even know what was going on, and they didn't even think it was that bad of a thing. And then other than that, some people assume that because SBUB was giving it over to British, because British is a bigger country, they assume that this means that they will have more chances to work for the government. Again, this might not be the case, but maybe this was like back then, and then they think that British will change and give them more opportunities, and that will help. And then they believed that with giving away Sabah to British, they would have an easier time to recover their economy, same like Sarawak. And because of this, most people didn't even mind giving away their own state to